In the den of iniquity, vicinity no pretty, calamity fi hit we any moment, what a pity. Tomorrow never certain, what dwells behind the curtain, the face of evil smirking with that shifty eyes averting. It's not a steady bubble, that either pop or topple, many will fall and stumble, let the dozers gather rubble. From LA to Colorado, Guinea to Burkina Faso, cannons could breach the towers and the troops will storm the castle. Hey, I say, run, come, make we get it. Because the peace that is bestowed upon the meek is overrated. So run, come, make we get it. Calling all your daughters and your sons, we come forget it. I say, run, come, make we get it. Because the peace that is bestowed upon the meek is overrated. Lord, run, come, make we get it. Calling all your daughters and your sons, we come forget it. With the rubble steady rising, and hearts are compromising. Convictions here are stifling, making evil appetizing. The fists are steady forming, and countenance is falling. Defenses are withdrawing, possibilities are falling. In these your circumstances, evil will make advances. Pick up your sword and lances, and be sure to take your stances. Victory is never promised, the battle is upon us. Gather the brave and honest, and the righteous in your corners.
Hello. Microphone check. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Getting Ish Done with Ike and Dr. Thunder. How's it going, Dr. Thunder?
I'm all right. How are you doing?
Not bad. And I'll be doing a lot better when you click that like button, click the share button, and also click the notification bell. Subscribe button as well if you've not already. So, Dr. Thunder, we're going to be continuing our conversation here about how to get rich. I think it's the it's the name of the podcast. And how to get that financial freedom or freedom, whatever it may be, that we were talking about last time. Last time we talked about compounding. Okay, how to compound your branding, skill, good reputation, character, such that quote unquote this luck thing flows to you. The whole thing later on was realized not to be luck and whatever, right? So far so good.
Yeah.
All right, so we're gonna talk about leverage today, right? When someone says leverage, that it sounds like a buzzword to me. I don't know if you get that same vibe. It sounds like go ahead.
Yeah. It's one of those it's an idea that word is sort of the best word we have to describe it. However, a lot of junk uses the same terminology.
Mm-hmm.
So you risk if it was like a 5-second clip, as soon as you use the leverage word, then you're done. But if you have more time and if you can get people to stick around, then it's the next stuff that you say that will either exonerate you or convict you.
Okay, so let's try to be thorough without being long-winded here that's what I'm trying to do now, I guess. I think thoroughness would demand that we just put something down with regards to what leverage is. Leverage is one of those kind of words that is an analogy. It's a mechanical analogy. It's a mechanical reference, right? That is basically means a force multiplier. And even in the analogy, the meaning is not lost, right? So the idea is to take a lever and to create this rotational force. The longer the lever, the more force you can apply of this rotational force. So leverage is a force multiplier. When you can use other people's or you can use capital, for example, that's a force multiplier. Using other people's labor is a force multiplier, and blah blah blah. But so far, are we cool by saying that leverage is mainly a force multiplier type situation? Is what we're talking about?
Yes.
All right, let's get into this. Now, this is about Shout out to Naval Ravikant, the Naval podcast, talking about how to get rich. A pretty long podcast, but with many, it's rather dense, let's say. Okay. Dense, filled with nice, concise chunks of wisdom, if you will. And today we're going to start talking about leverage. Let's see. I guess it's muted.
So the first tweet on accountability was embrace accountability and take business risks under your own name. Society will reward you with responsibility, equity, and leverage.
Yeah, so to get rich, you're going to need leverage, and leverage comes in labor, comes in capital, or it can come through code or media. But most of these, like labor and capital, people have to give to you. For labor, somebody has to follow you. For capital, somebody has to give you money or assets to manage or machines. So to get these things, you have to build up credibility, and you have to do those under your own name as much as possible, which is risky. So accountability is a double-edged thing. It allows you to take credit when things go well and to bear the brunt of the failure when things go badly. So in that sense, people who are stamping their names on things aren't foolish, they're just confident. Maybe it turns out to be foolish in the end, but if you look at a Kanye or an Oprah or a Trump or an Elon or anyone like that, these people can get rich just off their name because their name is such powerful branding. Regardless of what you think of Trump, you have to realize that the guy was among the best in the world at just branding his name. Why would you go to Trump Casino? It used to be because Trump. Why would you go to Trump Tower? Because of Trump. When it came time to vote, I think there were a lot of voters who just went in and said Trump. They recognized the name.
Interesting, Dr. Thunder. What do you think here? Below the surface level of branding, right? There is what was said earlier was basically accountability being leveraged, right? Accountability or risk or whatever it may be, right? You want to call it, right? Is leverage. Reminds me of some show we did about sweat equity and another show we did about leverage. But what do you have to say about this here, about accountability, putting your name on the line, being a certain kind of leverage? It's almost like collateral, putting bail or putting a bond down, for example. It's like, oh, is your neck on the line? If you put your neck on the line, cool. Then, anyways, go ahead.
Yeah, it's like if you're, willing to be a certain kind of vulnerable and a certain kind of transparent, then and you have more or less you have proven yourself, and maybe not necessarily on the grand scale yet, but the people that are around you have seen you do certain things and it seems to work out, then it seems like they're going to be willing to maybe do the same thing or partner with you at least, or work harder for you.
Yeah, it's interesting that so basically what are typically called the factors of production, right? In some stale economics textbook somewhere, right? Land, capital, and entrepreneur, right? This kind of leverage which we're talking about seems to be the entrepreneur one, right? The accountability leverage.
Right.
I'm going to put my name on the line, take the risk leverage. And we said that it is a certain kind, it has a certain low barrier to entry, right? Especially if you want to tie sweat equity with it, right? Which reminds me of something else which we talked about, which is about learning the business, which a lot of times meaning you have to actually do everything in the business. Well, but all these things come to mind, right? But but so far, so good. Ladies and gentlemen, as you come in, click that like button, click the share button. Thank you very much.
So the name recognition paid off. Same thing with Oprah. She puts her brand on something, her name on something, and it flies off the shelves, and it's like instant validator. But these people also take risks for putting their name out there. Obviously, Trump is now probably hated by half or more than half of the country and by a big chunk of the world because he sticks his name out there. By putting your name out there, you become a celebrity, and fame has many, many downsides. It's better to be anonymous and rich than to be poor and famous, but even famous and rich has a lot of downsides associated with it. You're always in the public eye. So accountability is quite important. When you're working to build a product, or you're working in a team, or you're working in a business, we are constantly drummed into our heads how important it is to be part of a team. And absolutely agree with that. A lot of our training socially is telling us to not stick our necks out of the crowd. There's a saying that I hear from Australian friends that like the tall poppy gets cut, right? Don't stick your neck out. But I would say that actually a really, really well-functioning team is small and has clear accountability for each of the different portions. Like, so you can say, okay, this person is responsible for building the product. This person is responsible for the messaging. This person is responsible for raising money. This person is responsible for the pricing strategy and maybe the online advertising. So if somebody screws up, you know exactly who's responsible, while at the same time, if something goes really well, you also know exactly who's responsible. So if you have a small team and you have clearly delineated responsibilities, then you can still keep a very high level of accountability. And accountability is really important because when something succeeds or fails, if it fails, everybody points fingers at each other. And if it succeeds, everybody steps forward to take credit. And we've all had that experience when we were in school and we got like a group assignment to do.
Not the group project.
Yeah. So I wanted to say a couple things. So one of the things I thought was interesting is, well, it's not even just about it being interesting. It's more of like a point of clarification. So this issue with Trump's name, and it's it's bad to be broke and hated or whatever, or rich and hated, or it's better to be rich and nobody knows who you are, and all this kind of thing. To be truthful, everybody loved Trump until he announced that he was going to go for president. And whatever you want to say about Trump, he is kind of a dirtbag kind of guy. I mean, just being, if I'm totally honest, in thinking of options of who I'd want my son to look up to, who I would suggest, Trump would probably not be. His certain archetype is sort of very thin-skinned, always has to get the last word in, kind of, obviously a narcissist, obviously, very proud of himself and all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of things about Trump that we could go for a long time and discuss some of those character flaws. But one thing that you have to say about Trump is that he did, as he said, do a great job of creating name recognition with his business, and as his detractors will quickly remind you that he was bankrupt several times and stuff like this, and as if that's some sort of sign of being a poor businessman. That just shows that they've never really been a business person, not at the magnitude that he has, right? So and it used to be that it was celebrated that he could be bankrupt, but everybody knew he was going to get the money back because because he was Trump, So it shows that he had a certain kind of knack. But I just think it interesting that folks bend over backwards to point out certain things that are not really negatives towards him being able to do be the president or something or whatever, but they'll point those things out, and it doesn't really have anything to do with his productivity. Like if you can say, okay, this guy is he's a bum. He's never won anything. He's never, he doesn't have any savvy, like the usual politician. Then I could see that. But the kinds of criticisms I think are interesting, especially since everybody knew what kind of person he was, and they celebrated him, knowing the kind of person that he was. Hollywood knowing the kind of dude that he was, and then they decided that they were going to, turn on him. So I don't know that exactly. I understand what he's trying to say, but there was a couple details in there that I think he sort of rushed past. It wasn't that people didn't know who he was, or this issue of him being hated because of his name. No, actually, he was celebrated and loved because of his name. It was politics that somehow sullied his name. So, actually, I think that's the actual issue there. So,
yeah. So Trump was not a good example for his overall point of fame having its downsides.
Right.
So, it is interesting that there are many places also that you can go with regards to what you mentioned, right? There's a certain type of dishonesty, right, involved with turning all of a sudden 180 degrees on certain issues or on certain people, right? It's always suspicious for me whenever I see that whole angel to devil transition with regards to people. It's almost like a childish a manifestation of childish behavior or childishness or whatever, right? So you're like worshiping somebody, and then you hate them, or you're just neutral about them, and then you hate. It's just you wonder, like, what could it be? Like, it's not like, oh, he got convicted recently with whatever. So I also find it interesting, and I wonder what you think about this. I know we totally go off the rails here, but it's all good. With regards to switching of a general, what I would call political attitudes, right? Where you're like, oh, I used to be on the left. Now I am on, now they're calling me right. I think I'm on the right. I always found that suspicious too, because I'm always. What do you think about that one? I find all this shiftiness to be suspicious, and even in the political arena, when someone does anything like a 180, I'm always suspicious. Are you suspicious of that too?
Well, it depends. It depends if you can track their conversion, right, or not. So in the case of somebody like Trump, I actually kind of believe his transition. He was a liberal, and he was a liberal back in the days when liberal was more like a centrist. And I think as he saw certain policies changed, he probably was like, hey, well, this kind of sucks for me. And I don't see what the benefit is of me, supporting these policies. So then I can see him changing. As far as him going from pro-choice to pro-life, that also could have been a thing where, the science, that maybe there wasn't enough scientific evidence to sort of make certain arguments clearer or more salient or whatever, and maybe he felt like he got that confirmation at some point, and he decided, hey, and or because he had sort of become more of a conservative, as it were, he was bumping elbows with more people that were pro-life and maybe some assertive and aggressive people that didn't care that his name was Donald Trump and that they would talk to him straight. Maybe that's a possible scenario too. Sometimes I think meeting the right person that, you know, doesn't buy your crap and will just talk to you straight. Sometimes people are very, you know, they're very affected by that. I mean, I don't know. And sometimes it's like, it almost seems, it can seem fake, certain transitions, because we don't realize that, you know, that
So
kind of interaction can be that effective. So,
I
so if you can track the conversion,
yeah.
if you can track the conversion if it happened over a period of time, and if the points that they're making in their discussion about why they changed, they make sense and they're not sort of recoiling from having the conversation, then I would tend to believe them. I mean, my views are nowhere like they were, you know, before. My core values, my core beliefs are very similar, are pretty much the same, but on certain issues, I've totally changed the way that I see those issues. So I give people the opportunity to do that, but where I don't believe it is when it's a short period of time, there's an obvious benefit that they're going to receive politically, and there also haven't been particularly transparent about their sort of conversion story, or as it were. Those are the folks that I don't believe.
I see. The power of conversations aspect that you added to it there, I think is one of the key takeaways there. Okay. Which would be one that I would not be likely to give a lot of credence to or weight to or whatever. But I understand how powerful that can be. Then
Has to be the right person.
Yeah. Then there's the there is. So let me ask you this, Dr. No. There are too many directions to go. This is.
I mean, you might as well ask me now.
No. It's.
Then we can jump back in.
Yeah. We can.
You know, we can make this a 4-parter too. You know. No,
with regards to this changing again, this kind of a changing, and then you mentioned the core, because the core is one aspect, right? Because I also mentioned an aspect of axioms also when I was describing the thing that I don't trust, right? Yeah. For me, I'm looking from the outside, looking at certain things as should be core and axiomatic, right? Yeah. And I'm like, I also know those things are beyond a certain type of what you may call formal logic. It's not like, oh, you finally convinced yourself, you finally solved the equation, huh? It's like, it's either your soul was there or like how did you pull that one off? So, but so that's the core aspect in terms of getting back to your core. But also, there's another thing in what we were talking about here that has to do with pragmatism. Generally, you would expect politicians to do certain types of things, so I don't really that's kind of part of the road, and also personalities too. There's certain personalities and ways of being that I would expect can be in the Democrat Party in Denver and the Republican Party in Mississippi, insofar as doing business, insofar as going to those churches, and insofar as actually believing what those places, believing in what's going on. Okay, because for them, they're after certain pragmatic outcomes, right? So that's another type of character. But I think that generally you described the best ways in which that transition can happen, that change can happen, right? Where you talked about the conversations, you talked about the, being around different types of people, and just kind of, by osmosis, if you will, overhearing it, understanding it, humanizing it. I'm sorry, what?
Yeah, and one of the things which, in this case is not really a change. It's just it's an acknowledgement that, you hear a lot of people talking about that, that were Democrats, talking about how the Democratic Party left them, kind of a thing, as opposed to them leaving the Democratic Party, as it were. And that now they find themselves, what's his name? No, I can't think of his. I can't think of him. He's in with the. He did an episode with. So he's this liberal guy. He describes himself as classical liberal. Let's see here.
He was the freaking Dave Rubin you're talking about.
Yeah, Dave Rubin. Thank you.
I knew it.
Yeah, but somebody like
Dave
a
Rubin
Dave
is exactly the example I was thinking about. It's kind of funny, right? That is the kind of guy that I'm just okay. So let me say something. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, go ahead.
No, let me be honest here. There is a part of what I'm saying that is purely coming from a snobbish point of view. It's just kind of like it is, but it does relate to what I mentioned about the core and quote unquote the axiomatic, where it's almost like, well, dude, like I don't understand how does that kind of a shift happen? Like it's. I don't know. So, but I do get that some of it is just being a snob and just kind of pointing over there and be like, but I'm also kind of genuinely wondering if that kind of a shift is real. If I think it's real,
well, I would argue.
Go ahead.
Yeah, but I would argue that Jordan Peterson, in many ways, I think is another that. Now, he would describe himself as being a liberal. I think Dave Rubin still would describe himself as being what he calls a classical liberal, right? But you have to know that the Democratic Party is not the same Democratic Party.
Okay,
it has gone so far in a particular direction that I think that people that are really more comfortable in the center, but maybe they have more of a soft place for some social programs and things, they may have identified with more Democratic sort of talking points than maybe typical Republican talking points, right? And especially when the Democrats used to have these pro-life Democrats, and in particular what was called Blue Dog Democrats, pretty good clip, a pretty good percentage of the Democrats actually identified as being much more of this kind of centrist kind of Democrat. That's not what we have now. So all of the weird, loony, woke stuff, it appears that there is a sort of uniform lockstep, at least in the way that they discuss things in the media. Now, maybe the real case is that they're fighting like cats and dogs behind closed doors, and the loonies are just winning. But what it appears to be is that if you're a Democrat, you're likely to buy a lot of stuff that you used to not be willing to buy. And so in that situation, it's not a matter of a transformation or a conversion story at all. It's really just a matter of recognizing that you no longer can identify with something that has changed so much, and now you got to go somewhere else.
Yes, the blue dogs and the blue collar, the unions, all that stuff, right? Which was flipped for more identitarian stuff, right? Somebody mentioned it, like, like an A-frame house, like, okay, so the center is over here and then there's the left and there's the right or whatever. That the A-frame is like getting steeper and steeper, where it's like people from the center are like, it's like they need to, like, you're in danger of just slipping into oblivion. So they're all trying to gather up here in this weird place on the top, like saying what the hell is going on. But anyways, we are going to continue talking about leverage here, okay? We're talking about leverage because when we looked at the factors of production, land, which is capital, and labor, and entrepreneur, we see that all these different kinds are leverage in and of themselves. And we're talking about this leverage of accountability, leverage of putting yourself out there, leverage of putting your brand out there. That's how this whole Donald Trump thing came. And then we went into the political thing, talked a little bit about, the changings of the wind and whatnot. And now we're back full circle talking about leverage again. Yeah, isn't that what we did, Dr. Thunder?
Yeah.
And there were people.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. And by the way, people seem to think that we're hypersensitive about hypocrisy. Okay. And look, I'm not soft on hypocrisy or something. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that people tend to be hypersensitive about that. And so we forget that with politics is about associating with people and issues and agendas that will serve you the best. That's what politics is. Okay, so
it's not some philosophical purity or something.
Right. So if certain things serve you better, and maybe it's because you just became older, and a particular party is talking
the other
stuff.
one where I'm like, well, I know it's generally true, right? It's generally true, and it also makes sense with experience. You patterns become like you just be like when you were a kid versus when you grow up, blah blah blah. But did you change? Because here's what here's my thing. Like for me, it's actually more of the reverse. I was just teenage years and early 20s, more of a die-hard Ayn Rand, cold-hearted bastard. Right? I've now calmed down as I've gotten older and kind of like, let's live and let live, that type of stuff. But that's
Well, it's interesting for me because I was more of a like a black nationalist, and this, I mean, even as a pretty young person, and it was because of my reading of Malcolm X's autobiography, and I really identified with that, and I didn't really have all the reasons why I should identify with it. There was just something about it that grabbed me, and just dealing and growing up the way that I did in the kind of community that I did, I think there was a need for me to have a certain kind of black identity, of course I had a black identity, but the black nationalist thing gave you a certain focal point, a certain thing to be aiming for, and a way to acknowledge certain issues that you recognize that were ubiquitous. It seemed to be a certain kind of solution to that. Now, I've been a Christian my whole life basically, and so that there was aspects of Malcolm X that I wasn't comfortable with, as far as his faith or whatever. I mean, I have a lot of respect for the Nation of Islam, but that's not going to be my thing. But what happened is I sort of transitioned into being anywhere from someone that was maybe more liberal than that to someone that was way more conservative, and even conservative in the sense that we talk about politically now, conservative versus progressive or whatever. And then I sort of started to kind of transition sort of back to where I was with that. And the thing about the black nationalist thing is it allows you to be quite conservative with respect to most of the important issues, because the black nationalists are very conservative, right? But it also allows you to acknowledge certain historical issues and recognize certain problems. Because sometimes I feel like the conservatives, they just try to ignore the sort of certain history of oppression of a certain, people with a certain skin color, and they don't want to acknowledge or talk about that.
Can I ask you something there on this?
Sure.
Okay, so they're both conservative, and also you can have the opportunity to highlight some inequities, some injustices, some things which will
Right.
typically be quote unquote on the left, right? So,
Right.
I just thought that some may say that the conservatism, okay, and this doesn't, it has nothing to do with, you know, your overall judgment of the institution or any particular movement, what you black nationalism, what you're talking about, right? But that the conservatism in this day and age is a what I mean by conservatism in this case is the social conservatism, okay,
Right.
of black nationalism, insofar as it is about community and family and whatever, is a disadvantage, some would say, because they would say that it is become dogmatically so and unwilling to look at the new realities of that this
Yeah.
red pillar is about to drop on them, right?
Yeah.
You know the
Yeah.
argument. You're in these streets,
Uh,
right? What do you
I'm
think
very
about
much
that?
familiar with this. I'm very much familiar with this argument.
Okay.
It's interesting because you know I'm married, so that's against the red pillar thing. I am I'm still pulling for the community. I'm still pulling for it. I recognize that there are probably irreversible issues and challenges and problems. I do think that it has to be on a one-on-one sort of basis, any kind of transformation. So if I can grab a hold of just a couple people and and have an impact on them, then that's probably the extent to what I think can be reliably, effectively done. Which is kind of sad. But I would say though that the black nationalist things would point out all of the dysfunction. It would say, look, this stuff is jacked up and that stuff is jacked up, and here's the way back to something that actually looks like something that we can be proud of, as it were.
Yeah, and
Now,
I think also
in mass, people are going to ignore it. In mass, people will ignore it. However, you'll still get some people, and that's all you can do.
Mhm. Yeah, I think people also chafe against certain communitarian efforts in a place where they would say that the community is quote unquote dead. By that they mean they've found some other affiliations to serve that family function or whatever, either down in the nuclear family or whatever kind of space they found that in. And then wherever they see anyone doing anything communitarian, rather than say, oh, well, it might get some people, there is a tendency to lash out against it rather, right? And I
Right.
understand part of the lashing out, because part of the lashing out, well, I guess this part is not lashing out, but the part that I get is I'm not going to perhaps be one of those people that would be swayed by anything communitarian, generally speaking. But I get it, right? So
Yeah. I mean, I've been very critical. For instance, one of these community organizations that we're talking about is church. It's Black Church, right? So, and if I'm honest, in most of the important ways, I think that the Black Church has been, even though sincerely well-meaning in most respects, I think it has been an abject failure. That it feels bad to say that. It hurts to say that. I don't like saying that.
okay, so then let's
I don't
stay
wanna
there.
say
Then
that.
let's stay right there, because I would like to ask.
But it's
Because I would like to ask something again, just a slight demarcation here. So when you say the failure, failure could the place from which you judge, okay, could generally be on in a couple of fronts, at least these two. It could be many more. You could have your moral judgments, right, about practices, beliefs, blah blah blah, doctrine, all this kind of stuff, where you could say these are failures, right? or then also you could have certain beliefs about what you think the church should be doing within the community and how it should be influencing the community, right? In other words, outcome driven. Again, if this demarcation is real, right? The demarcation between some certain kinds of foundational moral judgments that you have against the church, and then you have also outcome-based judgments, right? Now, which is which here? Is it outcome-based judgments? Because I'm skeptical of outcome-based judgment, because who are you to know which particular kind of hell the community is supposed to be in right now? But anyways, if that makes sense.
You're right. Yeah, that's a interesting thing. It's like in comparison to what, it's that sort of issue. And don't get me wrong, because there are Black churches that are exceptions to the rule, and that are doing, I think, tremendous work. When I say Black church, I'm talking about in general, and in general just means at least 51%. Okay, so that's what I mean. In that case, I think that if you look at the state of the Black community, if you look at basic metrics like, marital rates, divorce rates, the number of single mothers, kids without, fathers, the abortion rate in the Black community. If you look at, drug addiction, mass incarceration, especially the Black men. If you look at a lot of those kinds of metrics and you compare those that are church attenders from that community, in those that are not church attenders, you'd be hard pressed to see numbers that were any different, right? So of the people that are regular attenders of these churches, it doesn't appear that their conduct in mass is better conduct. That they are not being what's the word? They're not being tormented by the same ills that are in this cultural water that we're all drinking.
So this is an interesting point here. So okay, so how about, also you're saying even in terms of things such as marriages and all those things, that the numbers are more or less the same, single parent households and whatnot. Okay. Okay. Then it would seem in this case, my intuition would suggest it's like, okay, this is a place where, or one possibility, right, is if one only looked at just the people and their types vector, the only people left, logic is what I'm going with now. So it's like, what kind of, okay, so if then the only people left here are people whom really would, well, there are two camps. Obviously, you have the actual real, you would hope, right, that that there are actually some real, true, believing people there holding up the infrastructure of the church or whatever. And but they're not enough in numbers in order to affect those statistics that you're talking about. But then the attendees, the majority of the people are people whom are in dire need of that gathering every week, right? But at least that particular cohort is there, and there's nothing in particularly more moral about that, or that is going to drive someone to be more moral if, again, all they're there for is
right,
a club.
The gathering. Yeah. Well, I was thinking of this too. The point I said before, in comparison to what. So the thing is the fact is that we've not experienced the Black community without the Black church. So we don't. So from one perspective, you could say, well, it's because of the black church that maybe not. Maybe it's not 100% because of the black church, but if it had not been for the black church, then look at what then where would we actually be? So we could say maybe that's the only thing that's been holding anything possibly together at all. But when I think about, so we had this big Supreme Court case, the Roe v. Wade thing, and since Roe v. Wade, 1973, a year before I was born, since then there have been over 20 million abortions in the black community. Now, black folks in general are what I consider to be law-abiding. We've got a small percentage of criminals, and pookies, and whatever. But in large part, we tend to be law-abiding folks, maybe more so than other communities. And we tend to be religious. We tend to be church attenders. We tend to be, religious. And
you're
so
saying the law won there, or like the? Okay, well, go ahead. Keep
yeah.
going.
So yeah, that's where I'm going. So in my mind, I'm thinking, if the values of the church had been so effective in communicating morality to black people, then the law change in 73 would not have had the massive it would not have had the massive impact that it did, because prior to that law, the was white women that were getting the abortions in the highest percentages. Very few black women were getting abortions. And it wasn't because abortion was categorically illegal. It was not. You could go to places and get abortions legally prior to 73, prior to Roe v. Wade. But black folks were not doing it. And primarily we're not doing it is because we tend to be law abiding. We tend to follow the rules, especially if they have specific consequences that are known, right? But I think what's happened in the black church, especially as of late, there's been much less talk about critically important moral issues. It's not the popular thing to preach about hell, to preach about fire and brimstone, to preach about modesty, to preach about fornication and adultery, and to preach on all of the and all of the bad stuff,
Let me pause you right there. I hope to try to make this particular connection, because you're saying, you're putting a lot on the table, as they say, right? So one thing that you mentioned is the law-abiding nature of the community, okay, or a particular set of attributes of the community that makes it such that it is now susceptible to moral decay. Now, and then, so there is a perspective that could come in and say, look, and this perspective is in line with that. How do you know what's supposed to be going on in these times? Because only he knows the time and whatnot, right?
Right.
So it would say, take the point of view from Nietzsche, for example, and it's just a broad perspective saying, look, at this point of history, given the historical march of our ideas, God is dead, right? So he says, right? And we're going to see all these manifestations of it, right? And now we're seeing it because it killed, you get the picture, right? And that, okay, so in other words, what I'm saying is this particular decay, moral decay, is happening here in the West, where it it was predicted and it is seen, and there has been a trajectory going in that direction intellectually that would lead to quote unquote the killing of God, right? And that okay, one community in this case is at the forefront of it. Everyone's, but this is the general trajectory. Like it's just the other community is right behind you, so would go with this particular argument if this is the historical tendency. But I don't want to make the other connections but what do you think about just this particular point here of
yeah I mean, I've frequently said, if you want to see what's coming for the white community, just look at what's going on in the black community, right? So this sort of father absence, all of the things that get discussed with regularity in the manosphere, all of those sort of issues, the black manosphere, all of that stuff is coming from for any community that has their family structure so destroyed. The family is the center of everything. That's why it is described in such a grand, metaphor, nuclear family. It's of critical importance down to the molecule, right? It is the most. It's the basic building block of society. So you destroy that, and what are you going to have? You're going to be in rough shape.
Here's coming from the Let It Burn camp. Okay, obviously the Let It Burn camp is a branch. Is a particular branch of nihilism. They've already accepted the Nietzschean call and warning that, hey, you know what? This whole experiment has a particular direction, okay? And we're gonna ride the wave while we can or whatever. But I agree with you as to the importance of this kind of these units, which the family unit, right? The vitality that it is to the whole group and blah blah blah. But then I would say, look, it's like if there's an oil spill somewhere, and it has to wipe out all this particular life. It's like me moving on and saying, okay, we'll salvage what we can and we'll go try to make life elsewhere, is not saying that I am not dedicated to quote unquote life, right? It's me just seeing that, look, there was a plague here, right? And I love those cells in the nuclear family, if you will, but the nucleus and the cytoplasm and everything has been infected, and we have to move on, sir. Does that
yeah
mean you
that's shout out to CGA. That is CGA's position, right? So CGA is he's actually traditionalist, right? And he believes that if you're going to have kids, that the nuclear family is the best game in town for that. But he also thinks that let it burn, because it's done. It's not a good idea. He goes, practically ad nauseum. He goes on the whole, it's not worth it for men to get married. It's not, you're going to end up in the same scenario. He has this thing he calls the marriage wheel, where it predicts rather predictably, reliably. It predicts, what's going to happen in how many years. And
I like that you talked about the rather reliably and the usefulness of that particular tool. But go ahead.
Yeah, right. So he talks about that whole thing. It's a good predictor of most folks. Look, the marriage wheel didn't work that way.
It didn't on real patterns. It's almost like saying,
right,
okay, here's your tidal map, okay, or tidal graph or chart, whatever that I have for you, okay. Apparently most boats can't handle this particular thing, so there'll be a particular percentage of them that are getting wrecked, right? But everyone is going through certain cycles. The wheel is based on certain realities of the cycles of any relationship, right?
It's just a collection of data. That's all the wheel is. It's like so basically he collected data, he saw what the numbers were, and he created a diagram that basically represents the observable reality. Okay, now and it's getting worse, right? So I get that. And his whole thing, the free agent lifestyle, that is him saying, look, this is never going to come back. That ship has sailed, and so now this is the way that you have to operate in order to be able to do the stuff that you need to do with the least amount of risk of being totally destroyed by the court system, being destroyed by, X, Y, and Z. So this is the way that he has, this is how he's gone with that. So yeah.
Does it move?
I see that.
Does it move you, or do you? Or let's put it this way, because I know you're a libertarian type of person. I'm not going to call you a libertarian, because even libertarians, I probably chafe at the idea of even being in a group of any. I feel like.
Right.
So I'm like, oh, you're a libertarian type of person. Okay.
Right.
And I know that you probably, because you like good logical arguments. Do you see the logic and the practicality of the argument? Because I see it from an advice perspective. Like, okay, here's a map, generally to use, but the only problem is, it's one of these things where it's almost like, how do you deliver wisdom? Because everything in the plate there that he's telling you is true. The wheel, the collection, the things that will happen, generally speaking, psychologically, in any, and how do you deliver that without this type of a be careful or be warning or you better not, this, it's hard.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, he talks about, he's critical of what he calls hope strategists. Because hope is not a strategy, and that is when you don't have any information, you just hope it works out, or you do have information and you're hoping against hope, that kind of thing, and it's just that stuff doesn't tend to work out, now. Yeah, so there is a reality, there is an observable reality, and you shouldn't ignore reality. So the Bible says to be sober and vigilant, for your adversary, the devil, walks about as a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. So it seems that as though that passage is suggesting that by not being vigilant, by not being sober, we give permission to the devil to devour us, right? Seeking whom he may devour, not seeking whom he can devour, whom he may, right? So we have to know what's going on. We have to understand what the pitfalls are, but we have to also have to understand. I've described, I think on this program, I've described faith before. There's the New Testament word for the word faith, pistis. Of course, it's a Greek word. Pistis is actually a legal term. It's a legal word. Pistis literally means, and it's the word that we get trust, confidence, faith, believe in, all of that kind of stuff, is some sort of form of the word pistis. Pistis literally means to argue to the point of belief. to argue to the point of belief, or to contend with to the point of belief, right? So it's not a hope strategy, right? It's something that has been worked out, thought about, pondered on, and to the best of your ability, something that can correspond with reality. And that's how you develop trust, right? And you don't do trust wholesale, right? You don't just jump out and give everything, here, Ike, here's the key, keys to my, I just met you, Ike, here's the key to my house, check it out. That's not what you do. You do little things at a time, and you build up confidence and trust. And this is how faith works. Faith is not this blind faith. I'm out here, I see the guardrails at the Grand Canyon. I don't need those guardrails. I'm straight. I'm just going to walk out here. I'm stepping out on faith. I'm stepping out on faith now, into my death too, because, it turns out that gravity is a real thing. Right. So I think a lot of people have these things mixed up. They try to describe faith, and even people that are religious, zealous believers, right? They will describe faith in a way that the Bible does not describe it. The Bible does not expect us to take some irrational risks and then call that faith. That's foolishness. That's foolishness. As I said, be sober, be vigilant, for your adversary, the devil, walks about as a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. You must be informed. You must know what's actually going on. You must be sober. You must be sober-minded. It doesn't seem sober to be taking irrational risks. So now that doesn't mean that everything will always make perfect sense, that you'll know everything about everything, right? So there's there's a tension with this idea, with this concept. But I think the downside of totally losing all belief or hope in in the Black community, in church, in people, in relationships, in institutions, in the academy, in the music industry, in anything that people have anything to do with, is it would make life so unbearable to live, and we miss out on so much that actually ends up defining and giving our life meaning and purpose. And it's hard to with intensity press for things that you see no hope in. You see it's done anyway. What's the point? At some point, what really matters? Well, nothing really matters. I mean, so anyhow, it's a long way to get back around to this, but that's kind of where I stand. So I'm acknowledging reality. I recognize that there's a lot of issues, a lot of problems. I still think that some progress can be made, and even if that progress is only slowing down the eventual total demise, it seems to me to still be worth it.
Okay, that's all that is perfectly fine too. Yeah, because when you were talking there about the faith, I was thinking about Kierkegaard, and I was thinking about Abraham. But we're not gonna go there, Dr. Okay. we started somewhere, and then we ended at Kierkegaard and Fear and Trembling and whatnot. Now, since we're already past the 1 hour mark, let's play a little bit more of Naval here, who got us started on this conversation by getting us into this whole accountability question, your reputation question, that being something to leverage. Well, let's continue.
And there were probably a few people in there who did a lot of the work, and then there were a few people who just did a lot of grandstanding or positioning to do the work. So we're all familiar with this from a childhood sense, but it is uncomfortable to talk about. But clear accountability is important. Without accountability, you don't have incentives. Without accountability, you can't build credibility, but you take risk. So you take risk of...
Oh, by the way, too, I like how you brought up accountability also within a group in terms of working with people, that it is also functional, that if you don't have clear responsibility, it's not going to happen. It's like you have to have the brakes and the tires and the steering wheel. Otherwise, it's going to be a quivering mess of,
failure. You take risk of humiliation. You take risk.
And notice when he used the word risk, he had a context for that risk. He had developed accountability, responsibility. See, that's that rational part that I was talking about. Taking an irrational risk. Let me just jump out and do some wild stuff. That's not what he's saying. He's saying I have a reason to take this risk. It's these things that I just set up for you.
Indeed.
Accountability is important. Without accountability, you don't have incentives. Without accountability, you can't build credibility, but you take risk. So you take risk of failure, you take risk of humiliation, you take risk of failure under your own name, which, luckily in modern society, there's no more debtor's prison and people don't go to jail or get executed for losing other people's money, but we're still socially hardwired to not fail in public under our own names. And the people who have the ability to fail in public under their own names actually gain a lot of power. For example, I'll give a personal anecdote. Up until about 2013, 2014, my public persona was entirely around startups and investing. And only around 2014, 2015 did I start talking about philosophy and psychological things and broader things. And it made me a little nervous because I was doing it under my own name. And there were definitely people in the industry who sent me messages through the back channel like, what are you doing? You're ending your career. This is stupid. And I just went with it. I took a risk. Same with crypto early on. I took a risk. But when you put your name out there, you take a risk with certain things, you also get to reap the rewards. You get the benefits. Okay.
Did you get this warning, Dr. Thunder, too, when you decided to come out and spew your dystopian hate on YouTube? People tell you, hey, what are you doing? This is going to end your career. In other words, coming out there and doing things in your own name in this particular regard in terms of speaking.
My career was already over by the time
your career was already over. Well, you tenured professors can't complain about stuff, but let's go.
Accountability is important because that's how you're going to get leverage. That's how you're going to get credibility. It's also how you're going to get equity. You're going to get a piece of the business. When you're negotiating with other people, ultimately, if someone else is making a decision about how to compensate you, that decision will be based on how replaceable you are. And if you have high accountability, that makes you less replaceable. And then they have to give you equity, which is a piece of the upside. But equity itself is a good example because equity is also a risk-based.
Yeah, basically that whole you eat what you kill model, or performance-based pay, as they would say it, which is putting responsibility and accountability on someone. And then I got to share with you the spoils, right? And it does draw out the best out of the right type of person, okay, when applied in the right dosages, if you will.
Instrument.
Here, I want to digress just for a moment.
Go ahead.
So this business about people, contacting him, and probably doing it probably out of respect and maybe out of love and admiration for the guy. I want to see you screw your career up by doing whatever. Often it's the case. People, they'll do that because they don't. It's as if they're more afraid of things changing than you are. You've been a certain thing to them, or they're comfortable with you being a certain thing, and and maintaining a certain trajectory that they seem to understand and have some sort of perspective on. But when you start doing stuff that is not in line with that, people can get really uncomfortable with that. When they voice that, if it is what you should be doing, you have to ignore that. You just have to just say, look, this is what I believe I'm supposed to be doing. You might not understand it. You might not see why this is important. And the thing is that very few people in the end, when it turns out that what it is that you decided to start doing, it's a good thing that you started doing that. Because if you hadn't, you'd be in real trouble. They're probably not going to come back to you and say, you know what, I was wrong about that. You know what, you know what, you saw something that I didn't see. I admire that you were willing, to take a risk, that you saw something for whatever reason. You saw that this was a thing for you to do, an angle for you to exploit, whatever. I admire that about you. They're not gonna. That's not what's gonna happen. They'll not say anything. They may even forget that they ever said anything in the first place, right? And it doesn't matter the proximity of the person to you, it could be family members, it could be close friends, and it could be people that you really respect. It could be a mentor, someone that's like, man, this is the person I'm trying to be, this guy, and he's telling me that I, what's wrong with me for trying to do this. It's tough. You just have to do what you believe is right and do it with intensity.
Yeah, you got to do it over and over and over again. You have to work that muscle. You have to work the independence muscle a lot. And then when you work it a lot, you're also going to be able to discern good advice in the entire spectrum of total cheerleaders for you. And on the other end of the spectrum, you have people who are telling you, hey, don't go out there and, in this case, use your, put your name out there, put your neck out there, take that risk, whatever it may be. In that entire spectrum, okay, there is a wealth of wisdom, right? But you have to be strong not to be swayed, right? In order to go into that flea market and find the jewels, right? Because even in somebody, like, for example, there's the, if you are particularly reckless in your risk taking, I'm not saying that, oh, you're foolhardy, but you're a risk taker, but I consider myself a particular type of risk taker that does certain types of reckless things, right? And sometimes the overly cautious, like even let's say like your mom calling you, be like, oh, saying something, oh, I saw the blah blah blah. Then you're like, you would know how to take that in and be like, you know what? In this particular area here, she's right. Even though, yeah, mom, she's worried again, right, or whatever, right?
Right.
Which is that's what she does. But you'll notice, okay, over here, this makes sense, right? It'll match up with some other thing which your subconscious told you that day, or you dreamt about, or already that this may be a little too wild, right? So you'll be able to take that in. But definitely, yes, after having exercised your no muscle, your independence muscle a lot, and then you'll be able to kind of participate in this kind of discernment, if that makes sense.
And you can, and you can always make adjustments to what it is that you're doing. Maybe you're going in the right direction, but you need some refinement, and you can find ways to, even if the advice offered is really kind of wrong-headed, maybe there's still something that you can take in to try to refine what it is that you're doing a bit. Make some good strategic decisions.
Gives it as a good, like, let's say in a relationship where you're going to have a lot of back and forths, a lot of negotiation, a lot of somebody speaking their mind on something, that a good kind of way of keeping the peace, and peacekeeping is a complicated operation, doesn't involve just one thing. Okay. But one of the things that it involves is knowing how to prolong a conversation from one conversation to maybe several conversations over the course of months, because it just needs to be that way. because it is best that it be that way, right?
Right.
So one good practice in that whole endeavor is to just listen to what the person is saying, even if you're like, you're right, especially when let's say, especially in this case, when you're right, but it's a particular issue where, okay, I'm just going to listen, even take it abstractly in terms of what can I learn from this, like an abstract piece of
right.
nonfiction, right? you
Right.
know, and practice that, because and obviously the whole point that I'm trying to make here with regards to the cadence of conversation, taking one conversation and spreading it out, because later on there will be opportunity to revisit that thing. And if you're not married, in this case, to a psychopath, they will be in a different state, or be able to see, or perhaps even be saying the opposite of what they said a month ago, right?
Yep.
I'm sure you've seen that happen.
Oh yeah, all the
With
time. All the time.
And all you had to do there was sit and kind of listen and not be an idiot. One of the key things is that whole people trying to start and finish conversations at every sitting. There's an art to it, obviously. When do you start? When do you stop? When do you know which one to prolong? When you blah blah blah. Interesting indeed. But in continue, this dude here, apparently, once we listen to 10 seconds of him, we go off into that's the Naval effect. But yeah, as I said, there's a reason why I'm listening to him. He's pretty dense with the way he speaks. Like the words have meaning, and he's packing the sentences full of, okay, yeah, here's an idea, here's a this. It's not just fast food BS. But let's play a couple more, like one more minute here, and start landing the plane. Again, this is all about leverage, and we're just beginning by talking about accountability as leverage, your name as leverage, you being able to take responsibility as leverage. Call it being the entrepreneur aspect of the factors of production, right? So that is you leveraging yourself out there, your responsibility. You go out there and you take the loan, you sign your name on the dotted line. That is a type of leverage, and we explored that a little bit in this conversation. And let's see where we can land the plane here.
People have to give to you. For labor, somebody has to follow you. For capital, somebody has to give you money or assets to manage, or machines. So to get these things, you have to build up credibility, and you have to do those under your own name as much as possible, which is risky. So accountability is a double-edged thing. It allows you to take credit when things go well and to bear the brunt of the failure when things go badly. So in that sense, people who are stamping their names on things aren't foolish. They're just confident. Maybe it turns out to be foolish in the end, but if you look at a Kanye or an Oprah or a Trump or an Elon or anyone like that, these people can get rich just off their name, because their name is such powerful branding. Regardless of what you think of Trump, you have to realize that the guy was among the best in the world at just branding his name. Why would you go to Trump Casino? It used to be because Trump. Why would you go to Trump Tower? Because of Trump.
I guess I repeated this Trump part, but we can land the plane here.
Yeah.
And yeah, that whole middle part of the conversation there about change of political position is where we and then that's how we got into the politics / community and everything. What will be the things that you would consider axiomatic that you would be surprised if somebody all of a sudden changed? I almost suspect people sometimes when they go, there's a full atheism to full theist swing that I also find suspicious, because I'm always like, it always baffles me, because I never quite, what I mean is, and there's a particular, in this whole scenario, this person that did that full swing, I never quite completely understand them on either end when they're on either end. It's almost like zealotry on both ends every time. It's almost like they were a rabid atheist and now they're and I'm always kind of like, what is the need for all of this?
But what about someone like C.S. Lewis, right? Because what is it? Tolkien was C.S. Lewis's friend, right? And he converted through his conversation. Again, we talked about the power of conversation, and it has to be the right person. It had to be somebody that C.S. Lewis really respected, somebody that was really super smart, and could talk on his level. But
And you tracked it, right?
obviously,
There was a tracking, met your tracking criteria as well, right? That you could see through the discourse, this person moved to that. Okay, that is almost fine, but I almost suspect that it wasn't some kind of weird rabbit to rabbit, right?
yeah, but he was clearly an atheist, and he was pretty vociferous, as they say, atheist, or someone like a Josh McDowell. This is more of a contemporary example of this. Same kind of thing. He sought out to disprove the Bible, disprove Christianity, and he found evidence that demands a verdict. That was actually one of his first books.
Good.
Evidence that demands a verdict. So there are these examples of folks, but to my point earlier, those are easier to believe because you can see how they track. Right? Why they're making certain decisions. Like, oh, wait a minute, I just didn't know this. I didn't know that there actually was argumentation around the empty tomb, for instance, or that there was, argumentation suggesting that, well, hey, there are these other extra biblical accounts of Jesus the Nazarene, like Cornelius Tacitus and Flavius Josephus, and I didn't even know that those books existed. I thought it was just you just had to believe the Bible, or you had to believe this community of people that obviously was full of zealots early on. They were all, all the disciples of Christ were, tortured and martyred, and Peter was crucified upside down, and John, the writer of the book of Revelation, was blinded and exiled, and all of this kind of stuff. So they had to be, crazies and stuff. So I thought that's all you had to, to justify the stuff. But there could be a piece of, or like for some people, like the Dead Sea Scrolls, that for them, for some reason.
Yeah. It's a me problem. I get it as one of those me problems. I already initially mentioned that a part of it is almost snobbery. I do just kind of find that thing kind of strange.
No. Let me beat you up with this a lot longer. Take this.
I do find it strange to be like, and the whole and snobbery. I mean, like by the whole with the full negative connotation, because what I'm really doing there, a particular bad caricature of what I'm saying is, well, you should have known, right? That's kind of
right.
That's kind
you
of
didn't
part
already know
of
that.
it.
Right.
That's kind of like part. I'm like, or on the other end, I'm like, why is it that thing? Especially when it comes to certain kinds of materialistic type stuff, right? Where it's like you needed some kind of thing to show. I'm like, really?
But here, okay. So this is interesting because I deal with an aspect of this issue frequently with my students, especially the ones that have a lot of natural ability. So if you have a lot of natural ability, then your tendency is that if you dig something, if you like something, you can just play it. You can just figure out how to play it. You skip a lot of steps. You don't understand how you can do it, but you can just do it. All right. And so in my system, I have developed all of these sort of steps along the way, methods to acquire these fundamentals that they would have had to develop prior to the stuff that they can play that they don't really understand. Right. And by providing all of those steps, what usually happens is, a a light turns on.
Mm.
Something happens like, oh, wait a minute, that's why. And oh, wait a minute, this other thing, and that's why too. I think the natural ability with respect to musicianship, I think, equates to intelligence. I think if you're beyond a certain IQ, if you have a certain, I think there's a lot of stuff that you don't have to do that other people would have to do in order to make certain connections. And I think so. So I've seen this pretty frequently. Often is the case that people that are really, really intelligent, there's actually a lot of gaps in their information, and so I think it would actually be somewhat easy to find and discover some of what these holes are, and those holes could actually be critical holes.
That's a very true thing that you just mentioned there. And I was having a conversation with I was having a conversation with an employee regarding this, and because I was like, hey, I recognize this attribute in you because it's in me too. And I'm like, hey, because you can use your intuition to kind of, generally speaking, map out, conceptualize things, blah, 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 see what pieces need to be moved, and then generally do it. You are skipping a lot of details, right? A lot of time. I fall into that trap as well, right? Where, you start, you're not so, even though I found that, I have been training myself a lot to pay attention to the details. And that's mainly because, I'm starting a company. I have to give deliverables to a client. At the beginning, I am everything, right? I'm writing the invoices and taking the PO and doing the drawings and doing, so I forced myself to get into that. Here's a system, here's a routine, here's a details, right? But I was telling her about this, and she actually was quite happy because, when, let's say you're talking to somebody and you say something and they're like, oh, they got me, right? Like, oh, that's true, about me, right? So
Right.
she felt that I was like, hey, I get it. I noticed that you have this good intuition and you can kind of do that kind of stuff, but here's the danger in that crap, okay? Look,
Right.
you need to get down to these details. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to actually harness the power that you actually have. Okay,
That's
you
right.
don't make these details. Anyways, whatever. So
And you can, because you've been able to get away with it for as long as you have, the more time that goes by, the less likely that it's just going to occur to you that there's a massive hole in the way that you're actually putting things together. And so stuff like atheism, theism, in that sense, may not be that far apart with respect to that, because there could be a critical hole that they had not considered.
indeed, ladies and gentlemen, an apt place to kind of end this. But I'm curious, okay? I'm curious about that show on Thursday, okay? The conversations with the TikTok, and then you're still doing, I believe, the Simp Anthem of the Week or something like that.
I didn't do a Simp Anthem of the Week or any TikToks last week because I had a short time to get things together. But we did a show, and it was called "Here's Why My Son Will Never Attend Public School," and we went into a lot of these sort of woke agendas, stuff that they're experimenting and stuff in schools, by taking a look at an interview that Michaela Peterson recently did with a feminist that's been labeled a TERF, trans exclusionary radical feminist.
I did listen to you and Dr. Doug on that. That was last week. Okay.
Yeah, and so we didn't get through the whole interview. We went through about half of it. So we're going to do a part 2 tomorrow night on Thunder's Thoughts. It was a really good show last week. We're going to continue on along those lines with a lot more
yeah, some of the data that was coming out with regards
More of that.
to the, shall we say, ailment, the people experiencing a lot of psychological discomfort
Yep.
and such, because there was no particular category called transgender, and that there's no real data for that, but rather we do have data saying that people are, in other words, especially young girls, are rather acutely in this particular recent times, right?
Yep.
Complaining about, gender dysmorphia or dysphoria, whatever it may be, the dysphoria one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that may be a result of the stuff that we put in the water in terms of like the social media and certain other types of things, which, by the way, is also
Yeah.
affecting girls a lot, social media in general, right?
Yep.
And which because as a guy, you can get, okay, like I said, I get it how it would affect anybody, but as a girl, you don't. That whole image thing it's a way bigger deal over there. It's like Game Changer was saying. I called him. I was listening to him. It was like, hey, you know what? Sleeping Beauty. Even the sleep she got, the whatever. Why? Because she was beautiful, right? So it's like the image department is a key department over there in feminine land. But so you're continuing tomorrow, Thursday at 9:30 Eastern, I believe.
Yeah, so we're doing a part 2. Really fascinating, I think, conversation. I think critically important conversation. I talked a little bit, especially in the monologue, about how Clarence Thomas, I believe, because of his the recent ruling of the Supreme Court with respect to schooling and the ability to send your kids to whatever religious institution, education institution that you want, with there being no issue with separation of church and state. I think that's of critical importance, and I think it is a direct pathway once all the sort of legal stuff is completed and some new legislation is written. I think that is a direct pathway, especially in the Black community, to be able to send our kids to the kind of schools that will be of critical importance, because the schools that are in our neighborhoods are terrible, and then they're filled with all these nut jobs that think it's their job to fill your child's head full of a bunch of inappropriate stuff that if you ever were going to talk to your kid about it, you would be the one doing it, not some teacher. That kind of stuff. Now, I taught public school my wife has taught public school, so not everybody in there, and I know a lot of great conscientious good folks in teaching in public schools. They're also very much conflicted by a lot of the stuff that's going on, though, and in many cases are being forced to do things that they don't want to do. So so yeah,
is there a, shall we say, you should do a show, for example, about having the talk with kids about whatever the talk might be, right?
Right.
Well, yeah, because I'm sure there's a whole body of work out there about or schools of thought for sure regarding when, how, and regarding all kinds of talks, all kinds of interactions with kids, where where us adults talk about, opening them up into a particular kind of reality now, or the level of reality. I've always found the truth and directness to be the guiding stars. I'm not saying, truth and directness, keeping it real. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that the North Star is the truth and direct. Don't spin some crazy tale about a stork or some crazy bird, for example. Let's say, you know what I mean? Like, in other words, using that as an extreme. Like, I don't find it necessary to be doing all this extreme stuff, but it is partially due to. Anyways, we're going down on too many tangents, because I was, because let's say you're in Africa, for example, you would typically see women kind of just openly breastfeeding, or generally see exposed breasts of one sort or the other. And I'm sure if somebody's thinking, oh yeah, African documentaries, I see that too in the documentaries. Okay, whatever. But my point being, there's a certain kind of truth and directness, okay, to that whole you see where I'm going, blah blah blah, and there's not enough time to get into this thesis now. In terms of truth and directness being more just expose nature, reality, and it doesn't. I'm not saying exactly what to say or when to say it, but try to steer towards so that you can back up what you say. Yes, that's what I said before by just giving the details. For example, go ahead.
Yeah, and I don't even know that there is a uniform, like, for every kid you should tell them.
Oh, so you have to
exactly at this time. No, I don't think it's that.
Never
at
thought
all.
of anything because they're just like, oh, what do you talk about that? I like figure this shit out.
right. So, yeah, I think it's highly, it's highly personal. It's, and I'm not going to pretend to know, but I think my, in my conversations with my parents and with other folks that have had these conversations, you just kind of know when the right time is if you're paying attention. There's a lot. I think one of the issues is that there's a lot of parents don't pay any attention. So they're so busy working, doing X, Y, and Z, and so they're not really paying attention to certain things. Maybe as
what
much
you can
as
give
they
them
could.
though is how to be prepared for when the question gets asked. So like maybe they're not paying attention, whatever. But sometimes it does come in the form of a question. So it's like, okay, cool. Here's 3 ways in which you can approach the question, right?
Right. Yep.
Huh. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we will be back next time to continue the conversation about how to get rich. Okay. Yes, we did take a detour about how to be within a community also while you're getting rich, right? And how to leverage that image and that accountability and that branding and whatnot. We thank everyone who watched, clicked the like button, participated in the chat. Go ahead and leave your comments with regards to the conversation down in the comment section, I believe they call it, right? Is that it?
Yes.
And case closed. Okay, closed. Yes. Every Sunday on the channel, on my channel this week.
Yes.
And it'll be a hot topic.
Great show. We had a great show this past Sunday. It was about the R. Kelly trial. About the verdict. He got 30 years. I thought it was a really good conversation. It was Ike, myself, Bernard Riley, and the real Dana, and we had I thought, provocative, thought-provoking, interesting conversation with some singing by the real Dana, which was most unexpected. And
we live in the glory days there.
That's right. So that was was good. So check that out. And then of course we'll be 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on Ike's channel this week. It'll be a trending, interesting topic. And we'll have an all-star panel. So
in the den of iniquity, vicinity no pretty, calamity fi hit we any moment, what a pity. Tomorrow never certain, what draws behind the curtain, the face of evil's lurking, with that shifty eyes averting. It's not a steady bubble, that either pop or topple, many will fall and stumble, let the dozers gather rubble. From LA to Colorado, Guinea to Burkina Faso, cannon could reach the towers and the troops will storm the castle. I say, run, come, make we get it. Because the peace that is bestowed upon the meek is overrated. So run, come, make we get it. Calling all your daughters and your sons, we can't forget it. I say, run, run, come, make we get it. Because the peace that is bestowed upon the meek is overrated. Lord, run, run, come, make we get it. Calling out your daughters and your sons, we come forget it. With the rubble steady rising, and hearts are compromising. Convictions here are stifling, making evil appetizing. The fists are steady forming, and countenance is falling. Defenses are withdrawing, possibilities are falling. In these your circumstances, evil will make advances. Pick up your sword and lances, and be sure to take your stances. Victory is never promised, the battle is upon us. Gather the brave and honest, and the righteous in your corners.